Okay. All right. We're live. Welcome, everybody. We're here for September's edition of Legal AI Live in 2025. We've continued this monthly tradition now 9 months in a row. Who here's done things for 9 months in a row? I think we formed a habit officially, right? So we're missing our usual regular leader of the conversation, Dennis Kennedy, today. Can't join us, but he'll be back hopefully next month. But here I have with me, I have a lovely, phenomenal panel still, nevertheless. And so we'll go around the horn in the order that I have it. We'll go Damien, Greg, and then Gio. Just some short introductions because we got a lot to cover today.
Sure. Damien Real. My day job is with VLEX, so we got acquired by Clio, so I'll be joining them as soon as the consummation happens. And I build things and talk about the stuff I've built.
Greg?
Oh, sorry. Greg Kuchansky, Vice President of Thought Leadership at the American Arbitration Association, where I work for the AAA ICDR Institute, which is our internal think tank that's focused on access to justice and also AI in ADR.
And
George
Gio?
Bellis. I'm a lawyer in suburban Chicago. I'm an active user of AI and all technologies in the practice, primarily in the litigation arena.
All right, so we still got a nice diverse group. Today, I should say I'm Matthew Kurbis. I'm the subscription attorney. I am a fractional general counsel attorney to small business owners in the state of Illinois, and I have a podcast called Law Subscribed, where I interview folks about how we can and should be ditching the billable hour, usually leveraging technology like AI, and instead use alternative fees like the subscription model. So, and I'm in the transactional space using a lot of AI. So I'm sure we could all just like jam and like talk about whatever in AI, and we will. But I like to keep a little bit of the structure that Dennis gave us, which is just to ask the question that he likes to ask his students, no law professors currently professoring here today, and ask, last month, what did you try in AI? And so we'll go around backwards now. We'll go Gio, Greg, and then Damien.
I actually used ChatGPT Pro to, if it could give me a decent valuation of a business before I had a conversation with my business valuation consultant. And it was pretty serious result. I was pleased with it. And it also gave me some insights in what to dig deeper with in my conversation with our consultant.
That's interesting. I wonder, like, were you also pulling and like it doing numbers and math and like amortization, like anything like that?
Oh yeah, I threw all the numbers in. I threw all of the balance sheets, everything else in there. Of course, I hit the secure button first to make sure that it didn't go public. It was really interesting. I put in, what did I put in? P&Ls, balance sheets, detailed P&Ls, and it really got into the nitty gritty. Even talking about the industry itself and how the industry values businesses. It was kind of interesting.
Did the consultant, the valuation consultant, did they say any of the math was possibly wrong? Because like that's a big question, is like, well, it might get the math wrong.
I didn't get into it at that depth with the consultant. I just wanted to get an idea of what I might be needing from the consultant.
Yeah. And feel free, everybody, if you have comments, chime in on what other people are talking about. But Greg, we'll go to you. What did you try in AI?
Well, for once, I used some wrappers instead of going right directly to the model. We're sort of starting to build this software product, not a product, just a web app with some external partners. And we have a set process because we do a lot of this at the AAA, where there's a lot of ideation and requirements gathering at the beginning. And it can be a pretty long and drawn out process because you're building something from whole cloth. So in this case, before the first call, I used this tool called Base44 to basically vibe code up a proof of concept for the app. And then I used VLEX to generate a 50-state survey on the relevant law and use that as a knowledge base. And so when I got on the call, I just surprised everybody. I'm like, well, here, I built this. And so people had something they could react to. It wasn't perfect, but it was a good way there. And, this is how we're developing software now. And it's speeding up the process. And I think it's going to lead to better end results.
Damien.
That warms my heart to hear that, Greg. As somebody who helps build, the really smart people build at Vincent, I would say that the thing, last time I was on this meeting, I was thinking about buying a lake home and essentially used Claude and ChatGPT and Perplexity to be able to run deep research, and Google's Gemini, ran 4 reports and then kind of consolidated them. That was the last time. This time I did a similar thing where I'm giving a talk with 2 lawyers, and the one lawyer had created a PowerPoint, and they said, hey, can anything be improved. And so while we were talking, I ran the PowerPoint through Claude and through Gemini and through ChatGPT and through Perplexity. And I said, you're an expert lawyer who is an expert in AI and employment law. How can these be improved? And so I ran 4 reports, took all 4 of those reports, put them into Claude, and then say, now give me, I'm on a call with these other lawyers, give me a nice bullet point summary of how these PowerPoints can be improved. And literally in like 3 minutes after the person said, how can this be improved? I had some really good suggestions as to how things can be improved. Something that would have taken, me looking through for an hour, trying to figure out, racking my brains as to, what could be improved. So this is just going to the velocity of how much more quickly one can do things.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, this is like living the dream, right? Like all 4 of us are using AI in different ways. And like sometimes we do come here, we're all talking about sort of overlapping or similar things, but we're all using AI in super different ways. And I still use that accordion method or whatever I got a trivia. What'd you call it, Damian?
Yeah, you're right. It was the accordion. You start small and then it expands out to 100 pages and then you bring it back down small.
Yeah. That's like the second or third time that I've achieved some jargon from you. I think you're the one who taught me about RAG, and now I've been using accordion method, and there's probably it's hard to tell millionaires that their business model is broken. I think that was you too.
I stole that from Richard Susskind, but yeah,
Okay.
the accordion, as far as I know, I'm the only one that's used accordion.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, because I'm doing that, but I just didn't have the nomenclature. The nomenclature is fantastic. I want to remind everybody here that, so we've got 9 people already in live just in the first go round. Participate in the chat. Right. So this is meant to be participatory. We could have these conversations in private, record them, and publish them later. We do at legalailive.com and all podcast apps and YouTube. But please, you're here today. You've got one of the smallest panels we've had in a long time. Take advantage of this. If you're watching today, lawyers, you like to lurk. I get it. Especially if you're working at another firm, but come on, participate in the chat. We'd love to hear your questions. Tell us what you've done in AI in the last month or concerns or questions you have. So the last month in AI, I don't really think that I've started to use any new tools, but I'm leveraging Perplexity and Notebook LM and some of the new features in Paxton even a little bit more. And what's so cool about Notebook LM is even though it's a Google product, they're kind of treating it like a startup inside of Google. They are iterating all the time and developing new features, and where they used to just have these buttons inside of it where you could just click for generating a report or generating a study guide or other things. Now they've just launched like this week study cards and other things or custom reporting that you could do. And where previously, if you did a study guide, you could only click that button and it would result in the study guide based on their prompting that they're running in the background that's restricting it to the sources that you provided. Now you could actually, just like with audio overviews and video overviews, you could customize that study guide based on what you're actually looking for within the sources. And so that's a huge, I've already been trying to play around with it. But then another thing that they did, which is really interesting, which I just wish it would integrate with Google Drive. It doesn't. But now what you could do is that under that Discover Sources button, which I don't really use because I like to bring my own sources, you can, instead of finding sources from the web, you can now just find sources just from your Google Drive. And so you could, if you don't want to have to pour through those manual hours of going through your Google Drive and finding what's in there that I want to connect, now you could, I haven't really explored this yet because I literally discovered it live while we're walking somebody through it. You could now apparently just do that just in your Google Drive. So that's really exciting. I'm very excited. And I've been attending some seminars on the Microsoft side of things because it's a gap of knowledge for me since I'm all in the Google stuff. So I've learned some interesting things about what you could do in Copilot that I can't really parrot right now, but just trying to expand my knowledge in the areas where I'm not normally learning about that stuff.
I love what you're talking about, Notebook LM, which is rising in the pantheon of my most favorite LLMs these days. Notebook LM is just really fantastic. One of the things that they just rolled out, I think a week ago, is the ability to do 2 things. First is we've already known in the past that you've been able to create a podcast of any corpus of documents. So put in your brief and it'll do a podcast on your brief, or put in the judge's order and it'll do a podcast on the order, right? So it's already been able to do that for months. But the new thing it does is you can now have the hosts debate. That is, have them just like a jury deliberate on your item, or just like a judge debate each other on the panel. They can essentially be an appellate panel arguing over the thing. So that will give insights as to how a jury might think of your arguments, or how maybe a judge might think of your arguments. So thing number 1 is debate. That's new. Thing number 2 is critique. It won't just talk about it, but it'll actually say, you said this in your brief, but boy, that just seems like it's off. It doesn't pass the smell test. So being able to debate and critique are two things that lawyers really need a lot of. This is essentially the really harsh critic down the street or down the hall that will debate and critique you. Now, NotebookLM is able to do that out of the box.
Yeah, and then the last AI feature I discovered that Google launched recently is, I'm sure it's powered by Gemini. In any Google Doc now, any text, you could play it just like, using an AI voice that you get to pick from. So like I could turn anything into a podcast now, which is something that I think is phenomenal. So I got to, anything else? Anyone want to chime in on any interesting things happening in AI? Because I just did some guest lecturing and I want to talk about what the students had to think about it and how you all would respond to these types of questions. So unless there's anything anyone wants to talk about, that's where I'm going to go next.
Well, I mean, just back to the example you gave in NotebookLM, where you can actually leverage the AI to build the knowledge base for you based on your Google Drive. I think that's an example of like a really powerful design pattern. It's similar to how, if you have to do any sort of complex prompting, you should not be writing that prompt yourself. You should be asking the AI to write it for you. And it's just this other second order way of leveraging these models for productivity. And, it's really cool to hear.
Yeah. So let's agree. And as somebody who wanted to build a knowledge base when I was starting my firm and found it just like really tedious and time consuming and not sure if anyone would use it, yes. So this week I got to do 2 guest lecture sessions at my alma mater, DePaul College of Law, because I'm still local. I'm still not too far from Chicago. And I got to talk to essentially, I think it was like the whole 1L class. They have this class there called Prepare to Practice. And it's very focused on the business of law, the technology of law, the ethics, and like a lot of different things. And I think more and more law schools are starting to offer programs like this. And really proud that my alma mater is offering something like it. So for the last 3 years, I've been coming in to do these guest lectures, and man, they only do it once a year with me, and we do this every month, and there's changes. Legal AI Live, a year is hard, but I got a lot of feedback from the students and a lot of pushback, and really when I'm there, maybe only 5 out of the 100 plus students are even using AI. Maybe 20 of them have dabbled. And when I asked, why are you afraid of or not using AI, I did hear some common criticisms. But when you're talking to students about it, now most of them, let's say 80% of them are straight from undergrad. So you're really looking at Gen Z here. The critiques I got was it's not accurate. It's really bad for the environment. Let's start with those 2, because if I list them all out, we're going to be talking forever. So how would you address to Gen Z, primarily law students today, that it's not accurate and it's bad for the environment? And whoever wants to take that.
I would say 2 things, one to each. Not accurate, neither is your professor. Neither is any one human. We are inaccurate all sorts of ways. So there's lots of studies showing that they say, hey, humans, summarize this document, and then they have the machine summarize the document. They mix them up, give them to reviewers, and the reviewers say that the humans hallucinate more than the machines. That as humans get the facts wrong more than the large language models. And by the way, that was back in 2023, and they've already improved the machines much better. They hallucinate less. How much less do the humans hallucinate in the last 3 years? So anyway, that's thing number 1. Yeah, it's not accurate, but it is more accurate than the humans are. That's thing number 1. Thing number 2, bad for the environment. There's all sorts of studies. Google just released one that said that Google Gemini search or a ChatGPT search actually uses less energy than a Google search did 7 years ago. And so really it's the amount of energy needed to be able to do any particular query is dropping precipitously. That is dropping exponentially. And so really, I think the environmental is just a reason for people to stick their heads in the sand and try to feign some sort of moral superiority because they like the environment.
On the first point, I think that students should not be relying on the LLMs to be correct. I mean, you have to check your work, and it's a really important skill to learn as a lawyer, because even if you're reading like a secondary source, you can't necessarily rely on that. And you have to do your own thinking. And it's not a invitation to be lazy. It's just an invitation to be more productive.
Oh, Gio, you're muted.
So much for the cough button. Damien's points are well taken. I think we came across this at the State Bar Association annual meeting. I don't know if you were sitting on the couch with us, Matt, but there were a few of us who were talking about how we're using LLM, and there was an elderly lawyer, and I'd say elderly now, that meant older than me, which is pretty old. And just for context, I've been practicing law for 53 years, and you guys could figure out the numbers from there. And his argument, listening to us, he says, yeah, but it hallucinates, and it does this and everything else like that. And I said, so do you. We do this all the time. We all make mistakes. And what the important thing that I think that he walked away from the conversation with a whole different view about it. It's people are going to look for an excuse not to try it, not to use it, because number one, it's scary. No matter how you look at this, what we are embarking on is the great unknown. I keep saying that sometimes I fear for our practice. I fear for our humanity at times. But we have to always face the reality that this is what we are living, and this is how we're going to deal with. And in terms of you both of you made great points about that. I always wanted to verify my work when I was writing a brief. I always sent it to somebody else and said, "What do you think about this?" I now have that immediately on my desk where I draft something, I write a memorandum. I could ask the AI, "How am I doing? Did I miss something?" And it's important to do that. And I want to go to this, Damien. Federal judge and every law clerk has Westlaw. No disrespect on that, but
I know Damien's working on stuff. Maybe they won't forever.
yeah. But as soon as they get a brief, they put it into Westlaw's analyzer. They get a result from it. And if we know that as lawyers, then I think we're malpractice by not ourselves running it into our own analyzers using one of them. And it's a good not. Sometimes it doesn't always work, as I learned recently in federal court, but a bad case is still a bad case. A wrong case is a wrong case. But we have to do this. We have to start using the tools that we have advantage to us. And so stop looking for an excuse not to do it. The environment excuse, I just think, is absolute bullshit. Pardon my Greek. People are going to look for an excuse not to do it, and they're going to find it.
I would agree with two of those things and both those things. And so I would say that the trust but verify is something everybody has to do. You have to do it with your associates, do it with the bot too. And people that are building tools like we at Vincent are building tools to make trust but verify dead simple, because it gives you the answer and then it gives you a footnote where you can actually pull up the PDF that it came the source from. And so you can actually see on the same page the source, and then you see the output and you're like, okay, that is now trust but verify is easy. Thing number two is we're actually also doing that with bots. That is, the bot does draft number one. We have bot number two analyzing that to validate that it's true. And then we have bot number three actually draft the thing on there. So we're actually having the associate bot and then the partner bot and then the senior partner bot, even before it comes to a human. So really today you have to trust but verify, but really as it becomes cheaper and faster to have the bots, you could have 10 bots do the validation later on. So this is anybody who says, well, I don't trust it because it's not accurate and I have to verify. This is just a speed bump on the road to progress.
I remember a professor from Canada saying 2 years ago now, saying that what's the big deal about AI? We've had AI for years. It's called an associate. You ask for a brief and you get it and you go back and forth. And in the meantime, you could hear smoke coming out of the library as the wheels are grinding away, and you get a draft and you kick it back and say, no, you missed this, and it goes back and forth. And after 2 weeks, you finally get a brief done, and you're paying $15,000 a month for the associate instead of $500 a month for all the AIs that'll do a better job than that. And that's really where we're at.
I mean, just to play devil's advocate from the law student's perspective, they're not already experts in the law, and I can understand how it might feel scary that you're kind of, you don't have a net below you because there's no way to evaluate the accuracy of what's coming back from the model. And so I do think that's an important skill, and there's an open question about how new lawyers and law students are going to cultivate that skill when they have access to these powerful models. So I think that's a fair question and something to explore.
Greg, you're the only one of us who showed empathy. So I don't know if that makes you more likely to be an AI or the only human on here who's not AI, because AI apparently is very good at mimicking that. I don't know. So way to speak for the law students. Yes, maybe we should. I'll look into whether we should have like a law student on. We should have a law student who likes AI and a law student who doesn't on Legal AI Live. That could be interesting. So yeah, I mean, look, I said versions of all that stuff in my response, but since I got to do this talk twice, right? I got to lecture for the first half on Monday and the second half on Thursday. I heard some of the same questions coming in, so I was ready more so for round two. And when I got the pushback on environmental stuff, the first time I was like, well, do you drive a car? Do you eat beef? Do you eat dairy products? Like there's a lot of things we do that have a massive environmental impact that we don't think about, but we still do them anyway. And I realized that maybe wasn't a very good empathetic way to respond to something like that. So my second retort was, I drive an EV. I avoid at all using single-use plastics. I avoid eating beef and using dairy products and doing and I try to be environmentally conscious everywhere. Nevertheless, I do drive, and I do occasionally eat beef, and you don't not do these things, at all just because they might have some sort of environmental impact. And I've mentioned this in a past episode, but AI, yes, it has environmental impact, as does other technology, but it might actually help us crack fusion in like the next year, like it's actually the economics around. And I tried to talk like from a capitalist perspective, which I could tell didn't necessarily like line up with some of their viewpoints. But like there's every financial incentive in the world for these companies to figure out energy because it costs a lot of energy, and like they're making billions of dollars, so they want to solve this energy problem, not just for the planet, but for their business. And it will help if there's a planet of humans around to keep buying their products, right? And so I really think that those incentives are aligned, and I think we're gonna figure it out. And I realize that's optimistic, and that's sort of what I told them.
I agree with you. And on the capitalism side, of course, they're going to want to shrink the power because that shrinks their cost. Because the bottleneck right now, is spinning up 3 Mile Island again to be able to get enough power. So the fewer 3 Mile Islands Microsoft has to do, that is the less energy it costs to do it. That's the better for everybody. So yes, of course, capitalism means that everybody is trying to make the environmental impact smaller. That's thing number one. Thing number two is, as we think about Karl Marx, which I assume that Karl Marx is something that your students have read. Like the means of production have always been human, right? These are things that we've always had to throw enough humans at it to be able to produce things. But right now, increasingly, the means of production is machines. That is, the machines are able to do a lot of customer service work, and it's going to do hard swaths of the society. So as we move to humans doing work to maybe machines doing more of societal work, then the means of production moves from humans to GPUs and energy. Those are the constraints. And so
Look, I got to say, we do not, this is truly live, just so everybody watching. Damien, thank you for the segue, because the next two biggest critiques that I heard from students was it's eliminating jobs broadly eliminating jobs. So bad for the whole economy, not just for lawyers. And then I also heard, what are we doing? We're first-year law students. What could we expect if it's getting rid of entry-level jobs for us? So how would you all respond to those two critiques?
I've got thoughts, but I feel like I've been dominated. Go ahead.
Right. I go back to, you mentioned earlier, Damien, Richard Susskind, Professor Suskind's work, and he wrote a really good book recently about AI. And that is a topic, and it's going to change, but we are going to adapt to the new work environment, and there's going to be different jobs available. And we hope, at least I'm hopeful, that the human element it somehow will continue to be part of what we do, and that eventually the machines are not going to emote. At least I hope they won't emote. If not, they probably will be more empathetic to my wife and listening to things. But there's going to be changes, and especially in law. These students today are going to be working in 4 years in a completely different legal environment. What that's going to be, I don't know. Greg, with the AAA, a good question. I always wanted to ask this. When are we going to have bots making decisions that judges have been making for years?
It's a very timely topic, I'll say. And, it's certainly something that we are talking about and thinking about. And, to our earlier discussion of kind of human fallibility, yes, AIs can hallucinate, but there are all kinds of agentic frameworks that you can use to minimize those hallucinations or to track bias and all kinds of things. And, at the end of the day, maybe the AIs are going to be better at this than humans ever could be. And, people and society as a whole is going to have to get comfortable with that. And it's going to take time, and we're not there yet. But, I think the horse has left the barn, and this is the direction things are going in.
I agree. And I don't know, Gio, if you know Arbitrus.ai, which you can use to contracting parties could be able to say, we'll arbitrate using Arbitrus.ai. If you get in a dispute, you upload both your documents. Then 20 seconds later, an output comes. So you can imagine all the lawyers here are shirking in fear, saying, my God, why would anyone do that? Until you realize that, of course, the business people are not in the business to litigate. Business people are in the business to do business. So between option one, the old world, where I have to pay a lawyer and it takes months or years to be able to get a resolution and spend a lot of money for the privilege, or option two, 20 seconds later, I move on with my work, which are you going to choose? So really, as we think about, the perfect being the enemy of the good, number one, judges aren't perfect. We all know that. And number two, how it is compared to computers, how much better or worse are the machines than them? And number three, what's the incentive? The incentive, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. Business people have all the incentives to shrink their costs, fewer lawyer costs, and be able to move on with their business.
Judiciary is going to be part of that reduction because I think something like 40% of all lawsuits that are filed, at least in Cook County, consist of small claims cases involving they didn't pay their ComEd bill or whatever. Do you really need a judge to sit there and make that decision? Or is that something that can be done very efficiently? Because then you get to the real meat of the question is, why didn't you pay and how can you pay? Which is ultimately the real issue. And so we eliminate 40% of the lawsuits, we eliminate 40% of the judges, 40% of the courtrooms, and we become more efficient.
I would say we don't even eliminate, the judiciary in that context. I mean, they're, I would say, pretty overwhelmed in terms of the caseloads that they have otherwise. And so it's going to allow them to focus on the heavier weight stuff where you really need all of the controls and protections of, process. Whereas those very simple cases that really should just be negotiations can be diverted off of dockets and dealt with in a different way, perhaps using AI.
I mean, look, my perspective on it was, it was people's job to, get horse manure out of the way back in the horse and buggy days. And nobody is like worrying about that those jobs have been eliminated. So while we're not thinking right now of what those types of jobs are, I don't need to type anything from scratch ever again. Like I haven't needed to because of templates and automations anyway, but I still do a heck of a lot of typing. Not anymore, right? So the typist, just the nature of it. And the way I explain it is like this is taking us to the next step. If typing, was a 10x multiplier to speed as penmanship, I mean, large language model usage for writing, is 1,000x, 100,000x, speed from just typing. So It's just like the next stage in getting the writing done so much faster.
I 100% agree. And 2 points on that. Number one is that when I was an associate at my first job, my head of the secretaries gave me scolding saying that you are not dictating enough. Because she said that you need to dictate, and this is 1999. She said, you need to dictate more. I said, wait. I type at 120 words per minute, and my assistant types at 70 words per minute. So you're saying I should dictate, give it to my assistant. She'll type at half my speed, make a whole bunch of errors that I'm going to have to then correct and send it back in a round trip and then get it back to her. And that's better than me typing twice as quickly as she does, right? This is not the real, and this is back in 1999, right? So that's thing number one. And I type at 130, 140 words per minute, which is pretty good, but I speak at 240 words per minute, I just found out today. And so with dictation, large language models can dictate really, really well. So you could vibe code essentially a brief. I could say, I want this thing, and no, move this way. You could speak really quickly in a way that is just, yes, of course, we're not going to have to type anymore. We didn't have to type in 1999, and now we're not typing even less.
I mean, I've just been calling it vibing. I'm just vibing with my docs, right? At this point, right? Yeah. I really think that we all become managers, right? We've all sort of talked about this, right? And then there's the question of, well, how do you learn how to be a manager or what to manage if you never had to do the thing that you're managing? But I think you can. I just think we haven't tried it, and the curriculum needs to adapt. Society will adapt. We've always adapted. There's way more jobs that if you told somebody however many years ago, just 20 years ago, what some of the jobs are today, they'd be like, what? It's like science fiction. I mean, science fiction. Apple AirPods 3, you're just talking synchronously with somebody who also has them, and it's translating on the fly. We made it to Star Trek, ladies and gentlemen. We made a universal translator. So, and Damien, in 2018, I was told I should dictate more, just so you know. So, it hasn't really gone anywhere.
But we as lawyers don't move very quickly. And to the young lawyers, Greg, I really like your empathy. And I would say to them, it's never been a better time to be a solo young lawyer, that is to go out, hang out a shingle, because to do that, you need to do a reasonably competent job. The ethics rules say that you need to be reasonably competent. There's now myriad ways that you can reach that level of competency so much more quickly than you could have in the past. So you can get up to speed in an area. You can, with a large language model, actually do a much more competent job than you could in the past. There's never been a better time to hang out a shingle.
That ends part 1 of this month's Legal AI Live. Make sure to subscribe to the Legal AI Live podcast at legalailive.com to catch part 2. You could also subscribe to our new YouTube channel, or on any podcast app, just search Legal AI Live, and follow the Legal AI Live page on LinkedIn. See you next episode.